telling the truth, Doc. You gotta believe me.
Then tell me, future boy, who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan? The actor? Then who's vice president? Jerry Lewis?
A teenager from 1985 travels to 1955 and gets in the way of his parents falling in love, threatening to erase his very existence. This week, we geek out hard for one of our favorite movies ever, discussing semi-prime numbers, cars that look like they were built in Minecraft, and what Marty and Doc have in common with Woody and Buzz. Great Scott! We're about to find out if Back to the Future stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glutton. Alan says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test of Time podcast. My name is Alan Noah, and who are you joining me on my video screen?
This is James Brief, and Al, there is no screen here.
James, you and I are in the same room at the same time for the first time since March 2020.
It's basically a super high-definition, real-time 3D polygon hologram of me, but you can touch and interact, and it's basically me.
Wait, is it basically you or is it you?
It's me. I'm here, sitting in the room with you because yay!
This is so cool. I have to say, without exaggeration, I have talked to you the most throughout the pandemic, more than any of my other friends. I mean, family excluded, of course. But even still, even though I have seen you every single week for the past 15 months, it's still really good to see you, man.
It is good to see you.
It's good being back here. I feel like I haven't spent much time in the city, since the pandemic started, and I feel like your apartment looks pretty much the same, basically. But, still, it's like, wow, remember this place? Remember being in other places besides my house?
Right, and it's funny you say that my apartment looks the same because I've had all these plans to replace this couch and do this, but, back last summer, I'm like, nobody's coming over. Like, why should I get, a brand new couch? I'm inevitably probably going to get some stain on it, a year from now when my first friends are coming over. And I'll be like, no, I promise, it's sort of brand new. So I'm gonna be doing some stuff, but it's almost like we're babies doing our first step, our first solid food, because people are like, have you been to a restaurant yet? And my girlfriend and I, we went to our first party, and it was like a small party, and everyone was vaccinated there, and it was like, dumbass, this is all stuff you're freedoms of 2021. That's February of 2020.
Right. It's not your first, it's your first post-COVID whatever. And this is our first post-vaccination in-person podcast. So add that to the list of, first indoor dining, first Mets game, first podcast record. And we're celebrating this special occasion by talking about Back to the Future. And behind the scenes fact, I really wanted to do Back to the Future for episode 200. That was my big plan, my grand dream. And then, global pandemic kind of got in the way. I was hoping maybe we could do it for 250, and that didn't work out. But you had said somewhere along the way, why don't we make that our first episode back? And I get it in my head that oh no, we need to save the big movies for special episode numbers, but whatever, that doesn't matter. What matters is doing something special on a special occasion, and this is definitely a special occasion. Back to the Future is certainly a movie that you and I love, and we have talked about many, many, many times long before we ever started podcasting. Our show logo is very clearly an homage to the Back to the Future logo, which was designed by my friend Courtney Enos Robertson. And in honor of this special occasion of us talking about Back to the Future, we have new podcast cover art, which I think is pretty damn cool.
Who put this together, Al? This is really well done.
They're at Podcast Cover on Instagram. They started following us, or they liked one of our posts, and I was looking at some of their stuff, and I was like, this is really cool. Maybe our logo could use a little refresh. And it's still the same Test of Time logo for our show title, but, the art is different. It includes us as Doc and Marty. And when I was thinking that we would do this for episode 200, I actually started looking into doing a photo shoot with a DeLorean. I don't know if I ever told you that or not, but I was literally talking to some guy in February of 2020 about how we could arrange a photo shoot with a DeLorean. Obviously, COVID got in the way. Also, it's crazy expensive. If you own a DeLorean that you can make look like the time machine in this movie, you can charge a lot of money to get knuckleheads to come and pay money to do a photo shoot with it.
Well, I mean, I've seen that before. Basically, what we got to do is just come to Comic-Con with me this fall. And there's an area where you can take a picture with the original 60s Adam West Batmobile. There's always a DeLorean there.
I mean, you could also just do it with a green screen, I guess. But I thought it would be cool if we actually had a DeLorean and then we could have behind the scenes photos of us in the DeLorean and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. We'll dress up for Comic-Con like Marty and Doc.
Okay, awesome. I'm in for that.
And I know we didn't make it to 250 or 200, a nice round number like that, but 259 is a very special number. It's a semi-prime number.
What's a semi-prime number?
Well, it's not a prime number, but it's the product of two prime numbers.
I'm not even going to venture a guess. What are they? You mean you don't know?
7 and 37.
Okay. I don't know how to react to that.
Also, it's what's known as a rep digit, meaning it is 6 to the third, plus 6 to the second, plus 6 to the first, plus 6 to the 0. That's 259. So that's really special. And if that's not icing on the cake enough for you, here's the icing with the, I don't know if you like cherries, but it's got the sprinkles or whatever you want on it.
I like cherries.
According to Wikipedia, 259 is the country code of Zanzibar.
Okay, well, there you go. Then it's fine that we didn't do this for episode 200. No, look, it's a movie that both of us clearly love. I think a lot of people out there love it. I think everyone has seen this movie.
And I know people that haven't seen this film.
You do?
Yes.
You mean people who live in Zanzibar?
I watched this film with my girlfriend, and she had seen the film before as a very young child and only part one. So she remembered nothing of this film except that it existed and that it involved a time machine.
Listeners, you can't see this, but my jaw is on the floor. That is crazy. My kids have already seen these movies several times.
Yeah, but they're your kids.
But in case anyone hasn't seen Back to the Future, it's about 17-year-old Marty McFly who's living large in 1985. Then everything changes when his nuclear physicist friend, Dr. Emmett Brown, shows Marty the time machine he made out of a DeLorean. The pair is attacked by Libyan terrorists, Doc gets shot, and Marty escapes in the time machine, traveling back to 1955. In the past, Marty meets his parents, George and Lorraine, as teenagers. Marty gets in the way of their meeting and has to team up with the 1955 version of Doc to restore George and Lorraine's love connection and send Marty back to the future. I'm not going to ask you if this was a hit at the box office. I know it was. Was it the biggest hit of 1985? It had to have at least been one of the biggest hits of that year.
Well, I'll tell you the top 3 films of 1985. Let's see if you can get them in order.
Okay.
Rambo, First Blood, Part 2. I'm going to give you 4 of them, actually. I'm going to mix it up.
Whoa.
Beverly Hills Cop, Rocky 4, and Back to the Future. Try to rank those in order.
I'm going to say Back to the Future is 1, Beverly Hills Cop is 2, Rocky 4 is 3, and Rambo, First Blood, Part 2 is 4.
Wrong.
Aww.
Price is Right rules. You get to switch one answer.
All right, I'm switching Rocky and Rambo.
You got it. Ding, 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 ding. You win a new Honda.
Yay! Is it a Honda Odyssey, the minivan?
For the best father can get.
Yeah, this was a huge deal in 1985.
I mean, huge kind of underestimates it because it had a $19 million budget. And apparently it had been rejected like dozens of times at like
40
every
times.
studio. Yeah, ridiculous. And the script went through so many different versions. Some thought it was too G-rated, others thought it was too raunchy. Finally, this thing gets made for $19 million, and it opens at number one with $11 million. It opened in July of 1985, and it was number one July, August, September. It was number one for 15 weeks in a row, except for 1 week. And then it goes back to number one in December, and then goes back again to number one in February of 1986. And the weeks it's not number one, it's like number two all year. I mean, this was a monster hit.
Interesting.
The making of this film was pretty wild. Like you said, it was rejected everywhere. The head of Universal wanted to call it this awful title, Spaceman from Pluto, which is a reference to sort of like a line that George says, talking about his science fiction stuff, but horrible. And wouldn't have aged well even in the era of Pluto being declassified as a planet.
Well, certainly, very true. I read that the way that Spielberg got around that title was he sent the guy a memo saying, that was a really funny joke that we should call the movie Spaceman from Pluto. Everyone thought your joke was really funny. Keep those jokes coming. So that way the guy who said that wouldn't want to admit, no, I meant for you to take it seriously. And he dropped it. Apparently that guy, whose name escapes me right now, later said that story wasn't true. But that's the story that went around Hollywood.
That is interesting. And interestingly, Bob Gale, the guy who came up with the story, you ever hear of how he got the idea?
Yeah, it was basically he went home, was talking with his parents, or was looking through his dad's yearbook, right?
Yeah, the yearbook.
Yeah, and looking at his dad as a kid, thinking, I wonder if my dad and I would be friends. And then I think it was Robert Zemeckis who directed the movie, and I think co-wrote this one. I don't think he co-wrote the sequels. I might be wrong about that. But he was saying that made him think about his mom and all of the stories that she used to say. And I walked to school uphill both ways, and all of these stories that you're like, that's not right. That can't possibly be true. And so, the idea of going back in time and hanging out with your parents when they're your peers and not your parents sort of came to be.
Yeah, and Bob Gale actually saw that his dad was president of the class in high school, and he's like, my dad, the nerd, was a cool guy. So he got this whole idea that everything was completely different then. And they really wanted Michael J. Fox. And today, he's a superstar, but he was really just a television star at that point. He was in a pretty successful show at the time. It was called Family Ties. It was one of those family sitcoms, and Michael J. Fox was the breakout star of that.
And how did that theme song go?
Bet we've been together for 1,000,000 years.
And I'll bet we'll be together for 1,000,000 more.
Something.
On the night we kissed, and I can't remember what we ever did before. What would we do, baby, without us? What would we do, baby, without us? Sha-la-la-la.
And the most important part of that show, what did they show at the end of the closing credits?
Oh, well, there was that little title card for, I think it was the production company, where the guy said, sit, Ubu, sit. Good dog.
Ruff!
Right. And Courtney and I and our family, we have a black dog. And when we adopted him, we couldn't think of a name. And Courtney said, oh, we should name him Ubu, from that thing. It's a very, very specific reference. And some people think it's hilarious, and most people don't get it.
I think it's great, and I'm shocked you didn't come up with it. Congratulations to Courtney. It sounds like an Al thing to have come up with.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. Courtney is very good at naming dogs. She's named all of our dogs. She's really good at it.
Yep, Courtney is great at naming dogs. And who's great at directing films?
Steven Spielberg.
Yes, but this is the first Amblin Entertainment movie that he did not direct, and he got his colleague Robert Zemeckis to direct this one. And they really didn't want to give it to him because he was really an untested director. So the year before, he directed a film that we are going to review, a big hit from, I think, probably 1984, with Michael Douglas. You know what film that is?
Romancing the Stone.
Yeah. Kathleen Turner. It's sort of like an adventure film. We'll definitely review that. And this film, because they couldn't get Michael J. Fox because of family ties, was famously first cast with Eric Stoltz, who we recently saw in Pulp Fiction as the drug dealer, and also Ralph Macchio. He was offered the role, and he didn't want to do it because he didn't really get it, which I think is kind of weird. Like, how do you not get it?
Right. I read something, I forget if it was Bob Gale or Robert Zemeckis who said that when he had to fire Stoltz, it was like the hardest conversation he ever had in his life. He felt terrible. He says to this day that Eric Stoltz is a great actor, just wasn't right for this movie. And, you know, you can sort of get that, with no disrespect to Eric Stoltz, if they were watching the dailies and watching the footage and everything and it just didn't feel right, then it was probably ultimately the right call for the movie, because you watch this with Michael J. Fox and you can't imagine anyone else, or at least I can.
I can imagine a mustache Burt Reynolds, Norm Macdonald Burt Reynolds, Doc, man, that's heavy, Doc. But when you look at Eric Stoltz at that age, he looks the part completely. He's a handsome guy, he has that teen heartthrob look.
Sure.
And he is a great actor. And these guys did it, and that completely saved the film.
Right. But let's get into the movie itself, Back to the Future. It starts with clocks, which is appropriate for a movie called Back to the Future and with a very heavy theme about time.
It actually starts even better than that. It starts with this brilliant Alan Silvestri, just a tiny little touch of the score. We don't hear the brilliant score for like 20 minutes in. And, this is almost like a perfect screenplay. There's so many little things that you don't need to see, but if you know what this film is, these guys really did their homework. Like, this opening scene tells you everything in the film that you need. It tells you that there's something about time with all these clocks in there. It shows that this guy's an inventor, kind of a wacky inventor, because his inventions are like, they're Rube Goldberg devices. It's like, an automatic dog food thing, which is useful, but it's kind of weird.
It reminded me of the invention that Pee Wee Herman has in Pee Wee's Big Adventure.
Exactly. And as we slowly gaze across the apartment, or his house rather, we see a television report that there was some plutonium that was recently stolen. Mm-hmm. And then finally we get this teenager that comes in, cool looking guy. He comes in and he turns on it's like a power source. Every gauge goes to max. He turns everything up, kind of Spinal Tap, turn it up to 11. You see it's a huge amplifier, and the kid has an electric guitar. And the moment he puts the pick to a string, he blows the amplifier out, and the kid is blown 15 feet back. And, it's like, whoa, that was heavy.
It's a great gag. And I think I kind of forget, when I don't watch this movie for a while, just how much physical comedy Michael J. Fox does. And he's really good at it. Like pratfalls and things like that can be done wrong. And yeah, watching him go flying across the room, it's still funny. And then he gets a phone call from Doc. Doc tells him to meet him that night. He's got something important to show him. And Marty leaves the lab, and he's on his way to school, and he's riding his skateboard on the backs of trucks. He's kind of hitching a ride with these trucks and cars and things. And it just looks really damn cool. Also looks incredibly dangerous, but cool.
Absolutely. And, if I could have been any one of these teen cool guys, if I could have been Ferris Bueller, the jock in The Breakfast Club, or Jake from 16 Candles, or any of these so-called cool guys, I want to be Marty McFly. He was just not popular, and you kind of got the idea that he's probably not a popular kid at his high school, but he's just so cool.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. while he's skateboarding, Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News is playing, which is a great song that definitely stands the test of time. It's just an amazing track. It was then and it is now. When he shows up at school, he bumps into his girlfriend Jennifer, and she's warning him to look out for Strickland, who is, I guess, the principal or the dean or something. And he does catch them, and he gives them tardy slips. In my schools, tardies were not a thing. Did you worry about getting tardies?
No, but I mean, it's totally believable. We didn't even have detention, I don't think.
What kind of liberal hippie school did you go to?
I mean, if you were bad enough, then you got suspended. But, like, maybe they had detention. I mean, I never even was in a class where someone was, like, given detention.
Wow. You were just in a school of magical good children.
No, maybe all my classmates were well behaved in the days that I was in class.
all the days you weren't cutting class?
Yeah, they were all crazy. But later that day, he's auditioning to be his band in the presumably some school dance or Battle of the Bands. The judges, who are actually played by Huey Lewis and the News?
No,
or just Huey Lewis?
Just Huey Lewis. He plays the guy who like rejects Marty's band and says,
Right.
"You're just too darn loud." And his deal to do that cameo was that he wanted to do it uncredited and to wear like a disguise. He didn't want it to be like, "Look at me, I'm Huey Lewis." He thought it would be funnier if he was like kind of incognito and didn't get a credit, which I respect. I think that's pretty cool of Huey Lewis.
That's awesome. I wonder if because of that, he technically doesn't get SAG residuals and all that stuff.
Maybe, but I'm sure he gets money from Power of Love and everything.
Those are some good DVD sales. And now he's lamenting to his girlfriend. She's like, "You should send in your cassettes. Your demos are really good." And he's like, "Well, what if they say I'm no good? What if they say, beat it, get out of here, kid? I don't think I could take that kind of rejection." They're talking about going away for the weekend, and Marty's going to borrow the family car. They see this awesome Toyota 4x4. Then they're like, "Someday, Jennifer, like I'll have that car." And, you know, it's amazing because that 4x4 still looks pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
I'll say.
Definitely.
There's this game show that I watch sometimes on one of the, like, you know, smaller antenna channels. Classic Concentration, you know, with the late Alex Trebek. Do you ever see that game show?
Sure, yeah.
Well, because it took place like in the mid 80s, and you could always win one of like 10 cars. And oh my God, these cars look like they were made in like Minecraft. Like they look like they are completely like 8-bit pixelated, like a box on wheels, like Legos on wheels.
Right.
They're so ugly. And I just think that these guys got so lucky that they picked a cool looking like Toyota black 4x4 Jeep. This car like always looked good.
Yes, definitely. I mean, and then, you know, the time machine itself is made out of a DeLorean, and DeLoreans as a company are not commonplace, and you could argue that they don't stand the test of time, but then the counterpoint is they look so cool then and now, and like the gull wing doors are still a thing on Teslas, and this movie kind of immortalized them. I guess what I'm saying is they picked cool cars for this movie.
Well, to be honest, they picked a piece of crap car. I mean, the DeLorean was actually like a piece of crap. It was not this like Tesla. It's really high quality, but who knows if it could compete with the other companies? No, it was a failed business, but they did look cool. You're right.
Yes.
And it's famous that the original concept of the time machine was going to be a refrigerator.
Yeah.
But Spielberg didn't want kids reenacting the movie and hiding in refrigerators. And in the old days, refrigerators were not magnet locked. They were locked with like a latch. Like if you ever been to like, you know, restaurants, like walk-in refrigerator. So kids would suffocate because of course they're airtight. So
Right.
yeah, it was made into a car. And if you're going to make it into a car, good thing they didn't make it into any 1985 car that wasn't maybe like a Corvette because they're all ugly. And,
Well, the 1984 Pontiac Firebird is a pretty good looking car.
if you live in the Jersey Shore area.
My first car was a 1984 Pontiac Firebird, and it looked awesome, and I was not in the Jersey Shore area. Thank you very much.
That was like a 12-year-old car. That's a perfect car for a teenager. This car is 35 years old or something.
Yeah. But while Marty and Jennifer are hanging out in the Hill Valley town square, there's a woman who's saying, "Save the clock tower, save the clock tower. This clock tower was struck by lightning 30 years ago. This is important information." She hands Marty a flyer, and then Jennifer writes her phone number on it because she's staying at her grandma's house. You know, this is pre-cell phones. If Marty's going to call her later, he's going to need the landline phone number at the grandma's house. That's why this piece of paper is important, that Marty holds on to it. And he goes home, and the car that he was going to take for the weekend has been totaled, not by Marty or his siblings or his parents, but by his dad's boss, Biff.
Yeah, Biff is your quote-unquote alpha male, like, bully. Like,
Yeah.
he just treats this guy, George McFly, Marty's father, like a dog, and not like a good dog. Like you know, this is a terrible owner dog.
Right.
And in my headcanon, Biff has already totaled his own car. So when he was at work, he's like, "Hey, McFly, I'm going to borrow your car." And since he was drunk, he crashes the car. He even mentions that he spilled beer on himself when he crashed. Like, you wouldn't call him a loser because he's actually the boss. And, you know, he's one of those people that, you know, falls upwards. And Biff is like, "Hey, Marty, say hi to your mom for me."
Yeah.
And
very creepy.
yeah, it's very creepy. And, you know, we realize that George, his father, is a total submissive, like, wimp. Lorraine, Marty's mother, she's this unfit, alcoholic woman who's pale and, like, you know, like unhealthy pale. Not like, they're light-skinned. No.
Right.
I will tell you, as a kid, I did not realize that Crispin Glover and Leah Thompson were basically the same age as Marty McFly. I thought those makeup jobs were fantastic. I bought as a young kid that those were old parents. And Marty was a 17-year-old. I think they're basically all the same age within like a year of each other.
Yeah, they're very, very close together, which makes sense for the rest of the movie when they're all supposed to be teenagers. But yeah, I mean, the makeup is convincing. And Marty's brother and sister are older and they're still living at home and seems like they're in dead-end jobs. I think the brother works at Burger King, right? Lorraine's brother, Joey, was in jail and was maybe going to get out, but nope, he didn't. So we'll just have to eat the congratulations, Uncle Joey cake.
What do you think Uncle Joey did? I'll bet you in one of like the cartoon episodes, they go back and like have to break Uncle Joey out of jail or something.
That's a good question. I never really thought about it. I would hope it wasn't something violent. I feel like it wouldn't be like a white collar crime because they just seem like more of a blue collar family. I don't know.
In my headcanon, it's the same crime as that guy in the Shawshank Redemption, that greaser who's like, "Hey, he just tried to steal a television."
Like attempted robbery kind of a thing?
Yeah, that guy. Like, you know, a naughty boy. You had to go to jail, Uncle Joey. But it seems like he keeps being denied parole. So
right.
I don't think this headcanon of like, that rapscallion got a bad judge call. Judge was in a bad mood that day.
Maybe he keeps getting in fights on the prison yard or something.
Yeah, that Joey. And also the other thing we learn is that the mother's like, "I don't want you going away with this Jennifer. She sounds very promiscuous. When I was a kid, I never did any of these things or parked in a car with a boy."
It's foreshadowing what's going to happen later. And it's that thing with Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis where your parents tell you these stories and as a kid you're like, really? Really? I'll tell you that anytime I tell my kids something about me as a kid, they will go right to my parents and ask. Like, they will be like, "Hey, Grandma, when Dad was a kid, did he blah, 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 blah?" And, you know, sometimes I have to, you know, stand behind the kids and make the motions like, "Shh, no, don't tell them." Because, you know, you want your kids to think that you were perfect as a kid.
Right. I never yelled at my mother when I was a kid. You shouldn't yell at your mother.
Exactly.
And Marty goes out to the Twin Pines Mall at, I think, 1:17 a.m. or something.
Something like that.
Something like that. And he sees this huge truck, like this 18-wheeler truck. The back door opens, and the dry ice cloud comes out, and this DeLorean comes. And it's so cool looking.
It is. It's a very, very cool reveal. It's the first time we see Doc in the movie. And as Doc explains what he's invented, this time machine, the staging in this scene is just so amazing. I love it. Basically, it's just Doc kind of like running back and forth while he's explaining the time machine, and Marty's kind of like running back and forth after him. And then when he does the experiment with Einstein, Doc is controlling the car with remote control, and Doc and Marty are standing directly in the car's path. And it seems like this is the first time that Doc is doing this experiment. And you see that Marty is like, I'm going to go stand over here now. And Doc doesn't say anything, but he just kind of looks at Marty and he looks like hurt. And then like Marty's like, okay. And he kind of like steps closer to Doc. I mean, it seems very dangerous and reckless for the first time you're doing the experiment, but just like the way that every movement is done in this scene is perfect. It's really, really well done.
This scene is wonderful, and we've got the wonderful Alan Silvestri theme in the background. And we've now got this car, and we get the famous 88 miles per hour, which is just such a cool number, I think. It's a little bit, like, faster than what you're ever going to drive. But, like, once in your life, you may have been in a car that went that far. And you're like, woo, cool, 88 miles per hour.
You've only driven 88 miles per hour once in your life? Come on.
Not often, but it has happened. And it's really actually a very simple special effect. You know, just some blue lights turn on the car. You got these sparks coming out of the car in all directions, and then a flaming pair of tire tracks. It's really, really well done, and the special effect holds up, I think, perfectly today.
You could probably make it look even better with today's technology, but I do not think it looks bad. I think it looks fine.
No, when they remake this inevitably after Zemeckis and Gale die, because they won't make it during their lifetime, but, you know, the moment after the second one of these two gentlemen is dead, the children will announce that they have sold the rights to a production company for $1 billion.
I hope not, but probably.
Yeah. And in that remake, they will do this in CGI, and it will technically look a little better, but this doesn't need any improvement, this scene.
I agree. When Doc is explaining the time circuits, he says that if you wanted to go witness the signing of the Declaration of Independence, you go to July 4th, 1776, or you could go see the birth of Christ on December 25th in the year 0. I'm like, I'm a Jew, and I know that's wrong. Like, that's not right. And Doc should know better than that.
Right. And also, the rules of this time machine means he would have time traveled to California, and there is no year 0. Right? Like, there's 1 year before Christ, BC, and year 1 AD, the first year of our Lord. There's no year 0. Although I wonder what would happen. Where would the car take you?
I don't know, but that did just kind of leap out at me. I'm like, hey, that's not right. And there's also a line where Doc says that he's going to travel into the future, and he says that he'll find out who will win the next 25 World Series. And that's a throwaway line, because like when they were writing this movie, there was no intention for a sequel. But, you know, that kernel of an idea turned into, you know, a large part of the plot of Back to the Future Part 2.
You know, it's a complicated concept, time travel, and he just explains it so easily. I love just the simplicity of looking at the time circuits, and he says, this one tells you where you are, this one tells you where you're going, this one tells you where you were. Great, I got it. This makes perfect sense now. Doc says that to power the time machine, it's actually powered by plutonium. And as we know, neither in 1955 or 1985, or 2015 for that matter, plutonium is not exactly available in every corner drugstore. So Doc ripped it off of the terrorists of the time, which were the Libyans. And just as Doc is about to leave and venture on his journey to the future and see the next couple dozen World Series, the Libyans come to get their revenge on the guy that ripped him off, and they shoot Doc Brown, and he's down. And through a stroke of luck that their machine gun jams, Marty is able to escape in the car. You can tell that Marty is not remembering he's driving a time machine at this point, but he decides to just outrun them. He actually says, let's see if these bastards can do 90, and he puts it into 5th or 6th gear. You know, of course, he doesn't make it to 90. When he hits 88 miles per hour, everything goes lightning, and he's in a barn, 1955.
Right. The people who live at the barn hear the noise. They come out with a shotgun. They think it's a UFO or something. They start shooting. Marty flees, and he gets to the Hill Valley Town Square, and you hear the music, Mr. Sandman, and Marty is confused. He doesn't believe that he's in the past. He has every reason to believe that he's in the past, but he can't wrap his head around it. He goes into a diner so he can go and grab their phone book and look up Doc. Looking for a phone book is what someone from 1985 would do, and that did exist in 1955. It's not what you would do today. Now you would just try to like Google it some way. But in this diner, everyone is commenting on Marty's life preserver. What they think is a life preserver. It's really just a vest.
Yeah, it's just one of these puffy sleeveless vests, and it's a running gag. That is funny, but I will say that, I don't think puffy vests were ever a big thing in the 80s, certainly not for that long.
No, I don't think so. I think it's one of those things where it's like people know of the puffy vest in the 80s because of this movie, and like only because of this movie.
Right, like a DeLorean.
Exactly right.
And I will tell you that before I watched this movie with my girlfriend, I said, I'm going to tell you two things that you need to know about this film. One, the movie came out in 1985, so when they refer to like present day, they mean 1985.
Sure.
And number two, in the mid-'80s, there was a calorie-free diet soda called Tab, and there was also a caffeine-free Pepsi version called Pepsi Free. Those things you do need to know before you get into this film, because there's a great gag where Marty walks in, and he's still all razzled, he doesn't know where he is, and he says, "Give me a Tab." What does the guy at the counter say?
"You want a Tab, you gotta order something."
Okay, just give me a Pepsi Free.
"You want a Pepsi, you gotta pay for it."
All right, just give me something without a lot of sugar.
Right, and then he gives him a milk, right?
No, he gives him a coffee.
Oh, yes, right.
Which would negate the caffeine freeness that he was looking for. But back then, I don't think they really accounted the caffeine as much for the energy as much as the sugar. That'd be my guess.
Right. I can't imagine that decaf was a thing back then. Maybe it was. I don't know.
I think Sanka was like a 70s thing, but I don't know. And suddenly, a familiar voice, which we immediately recognize as Biff the Bully from 1985, he's now a young 17-year-old Biff, and he goes, "Hey, McFly!" And Marty instinctively turns, but next to him, we realize, is also George McFly, his 17-year-old father, who's now 17 years old in 1955, and they both turn to Biff. And Biff, like in the present day of 1985, he's still his bully. He basically says, "You got to do my homework for me, but hand it in early so I can recopy it in my handwriting." And he's like, "I don't ever want to see you around here again," which is a real power move.
Sure.
You don't need to add that line. You just humiliated the guy, but also you don't get to hang out where all the kids hang out.
It's definitely extra nasty at the end. And a guy who works at the diner is telling George that he should stand up for himself, and Marty recognizes that guy because in 1985, he is the mayor. And when the guy is saying, "Someday I'm going to be somebody," and Marty's like, "Oh yeah, you're going to be mayor." And this guy's like, "Yeah, mayor. I'm going to be mayor." And the guy who owns the diner, or the manager or whatever, is like, "Yeah, right, that'll never happen because this employee is black." And he's saying that there's no way there will ever be a black mayor, which is a thing that a person in 1955 might think. But then, 30 years later, that can happen.
Absolutely. And, if this movie were to be remade today, it would take place in 1991.
I know that, but I don't want to think about that.
No. And I say that not because, oh my God, it makes us feel so old. No. I say that because I don't think the film would work today. I think if you remake it, you got to go back to 1955 and like rescue grandma, grandma and grandpa or something from not meeting, because 1980s to 1950s is such an enormous jump culturally, technologically. Marty could easily blend in 1991 if it happened today. Just, you don't have a smartphone. Like, that's about it. Like, it's just not as big a shock. And I think it's amazing. Like, all the things about, like, there's racism in this film, and there's a lot of stuff that is really, really different than the quote-unquote modern 1985 day.
Yeah, that is true. There is a lot of that stuff. But when George leaves the restaurant, Marty goes after him, which is dumb. Like, I don't know that I ever really like thought about it that much. Like in the previous times I've watched this movie, I guess I just thought like, oh, it's his dad. He wants to go see his dad. But his initial instinct to find Doc, that makes sense. Like, go and find 1955 Doc. What's your 17-year-old dad going to do to help you? Literally nothing. But he goes and finds the dad, who is in a tree looking at a woman undressing. Is that Lorraine that he's staring at, or is it someone else? I wasn't sure.
I'm not sure, but it very well could be, because he's a peeping Tom, as Marty calls him, and George falls out of the tree, and he's about to get hit by the car, which, as the original history shows, he's going to get hit by the car. A young teenage Lorraine is going to nurse him back to health and find him like, oh, gee shucks, sympathy for him, fall in love with him. Then they get married eventually, and that's it. But this time, Marty sees his dad about to get hit by a car, and he decides, I'm going to save my dad. So he pushes his dad out of the way. Marty gets hit instead of his father, and now he's knocked out. He's brought in by Lorraine's family, and Lorraine nurses inadvertently her own son back to health. And just like she did with George, she's instantly enamored by this young man.
Right. Doc later says it's a Florence Nightingale effect where nurses fall for their patients. It did strike me that after Marty comes to, Lorraine says, you've been out for 9 hours. I was like, 9 hours and no one thought to take this kid to a hospital? Like, that's a long time for a kid to be knocked out. If you accidentally hit somebody with your car, I think the first thing you would want to do would be to take him to a hospital. If you thought, oh, maybe it was just a little conk on the head, I'll nurse him back to health at home. Maybe after an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 of this kid not regaining consciousness, you'd be like, yeah, I better take this kid to a hospital.
I could totally see people doing that. Al,
Wow.
You would be shocked at, like, and why did you wait until that tumor in your wrist was so big that when you brush your teeth, you punch yourself in the face?
Oh, God.
You know, like, some people will wait a long time before going to the hospital. So, unfortunately, that's true.
Yikes.
But, yeah, she winds up having a little crush on her own son. And there's a great little joke here that, they got lucky, I guess, that it holds up because the fashion line is still around and popular. But she keeps calling Marty Calvin because Calvin Klein has written all over his underwear. And I could see that, a name written on underwear, that starts in the 80s. That's not like a thing that happened in the 60s.
No, apparently that was a thing in the 50s. That's why they have that joke in there, that people would write their name in the underwear.
No, I mean like, Calvin Klein, Calvin Klein, Calvin Klein. That I don't think happened.
Oh, you mean like the name of the designer and the underwear. That's probably true. But there are these gags like when Marty goes downstairs and he's with her family and he meets little baby Joey who's in his playpen, and there's like a gag of like, oh, he just loves being in this playpen. And Marty says, better get used to these bars, kid. And little baby Joey is so cute. He's adorable.
Yeah, there's the little jokes about how Marty's already seen the episode of The Honeymooners, but it's a brand new show for them, and how they have 2 TVs, which no one would have. And I could understand that, because it would be like, in 1985, if someone said they had 2 computers in the house, you'd be like, nobody has 2 computers. There's the family computer.
Right.
And he winds up leaving after Elaine's getting a little too grabby by saying that he could stay with them for the week. He goes across town to find Doc's house. And it's a great gag here. He knocks on Doc's door, and Dr. Brown opens the door wearing this ridiculous, like, light bulb helmet. Marty's like, hey, Doc, I gotta talk to you. And he goes, quiet, quiet. And he puts a suction cup on his forehead. And it's just a ridiculous, stupid invention that doesn't work. I think it's very clever that Doc Brown is not this like super duper genius. He's kind of a nutcase. And, there's a fine line between nutcase and genius. I do like that a lot of his inventions are complete crap.
Right. I mean, he's an eccentric inventor, and not every invention is going to work. That makes sense. Marty's telling him he's from the future, and then Doc is like, who's the president in your time? And Doc says, Ronald Reagan. And of course, Ronald Reagan is an actor in the 50s, so, that's kind of laughable.
If they remade that film today, that would completely work again. Oh, tell me, future boy, who's the president of the United States in 2018? Donald Trump. It would be the same joke. Like, it would be like, oh, come on, you're not from the future. Like, it would be funny.
Right. But thankfully, if they made this movie now, that would not be the case. And if you said about Joe Biden, like, oh, yeah, I mean, he's in the Senate. That makes sense.
Joe Biden, the junior senator from Delaware? What?
Yeah, that joke wouldn't hit quite as much. But the way Marty is able to convince Doc that he really is from the future is he tells him he knows that Doc came up with the idea for the flux capacitor on that day. That's why Doc put this specific date into the time machine, because he's reminiscing of, oh, that was the day when I first had the idea for the flux capacitor, the invention that makes time travel possible. And when Marty says that through the closed door to Doc, then Doc believes it. And Marty shows him the video that he was filming at the Twin Pines Mall parking lot of the time machine experiment. I did stop for a minute and think, how the hell does Marty hook up that 1985 video camera to a 1955 TV? The connections couldn't possibly have been the same. You'd need to go to a Radio Shack or equivalent, maybe a Sears or something, to get some special wiring connectors. Something, I would think.
Or you'd have to live in an inventor's house.
Valid point. I guess he might have something lying around. But the funniest part is when 1955 Doc hears 1985 Doc say that he needs 1.21 gigawatts of power, which is just not a thing in real life. There's no such thing as a gigawatt, but there's no way that 1955 Doc can come up with 1.21 gigawatts. To have that much power, you need something like, oh, I don't know, a bolt of lightning. Exactly.
Yeah, but the problem is you never know when or where a bolt of lightning is going to strike.
We do now.
Exactly, because Marty got that flyer. The one problem is I always thought the flyer should say, instead of saying it struck at exactly 11:01 p.m.
10:04 p.m.
10:04 p.m., it should have said 10:04 and 14 seconds. Because there's a lot of leeway in the 60 seconds there.
I have the exact same thought, yes.
But anyway, they get the idea that they're going to somehow use this lightning bolt to harness the electricity, channel it into the flux capacitor of the DeLorean, and send Marty back to the future.
Just like the title of the movie.
That's correct. And Marty thinks it's awesome. He's like, all right, cool. I'll hang out in 1955. It'll be awesome. And Doc explains that any interference could, have catastrophic results. The whole butterfly effect. And then when Marty explains that he interfered with his parents' meeting today, then he notices that a photograph of Marty and his two siblings is starting to fade.
Right. It starts with the older brother first, who's starting to lose his top of his head, and then it kind of works its way down the older brother, then the older sister, then it gets to Marty. So now Marty has to get his parents back together, and it's hard because Lorraine has already fallen for Marty. And when Marty is talking to George, he finds out that they have a lot in common. And George is writing these stories and he's too afraid of rejection to submit them anywhere, which is an exact callback to Marty being afraid of rejection for his music. And Biff starts getting handsy with Lorraine in school, and Marty steps in and interferes and, stands up for his mom, which is instinct. It's the same thing he did when he pushed his dad out of the way of the car, but it's only making things worse because now he's on Biff's radar and Biff wants to beat the crap out of Marty, and he's making himself look cooler and more attractive to Lorraine while George is just stuck by the wayside and not doing anything. So Marty decides he has to take bold, drastic action, and he uses the fact that George is really into sci-fi, and he breaks into his house and he puts on the radiation suit that he was wearing when he drove in the DeLorean when he first traveled back to 1955, and he says that he is Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan, which is kind of a sin to combine, Star Wars and Star Trek into one sentence. You don't do that. That violates the nerd code.
Speaking of nerd code, do you know what planet Darth Vader's from?
Yeah, he's from Tatooine.
I knew it. I wanted to see if you knew it.
How dare you? I'm insulted that you would even ask me that question.
Because if you were going to like say I didn't remember, I was going to really make fun of you. That's why.
Although I guess you could say that Darth Vader is from Mustafar and Anakin Skywalker is from Tatooine. Although Sidious first calls Anakin Darth Vader on Coruscant. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that Marty, as Darth Vader, uses music from Edward Van Halen to wake up his dad and tell him that he better ask out Lorraine.
Absolutely. And, they got lucky, I guess, that they used Van Halen and not, Wham or something.
Well, Wham was not known for their guitar solos. To be clear, though, this is not the band Van Halen. This is just Edward Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen to his friends, doing a guitar solo because apparently the rest of the band Van Halen didn't want to do it. And Eddie Van Halen was like, yeah, sure, I'll record like a guitar solo. So this is not like a Van Halen song that you might have heard.
Oh, okay. But, this is actually mostly a deleted scene. I'm sure you've probably seen it on the DVDs and stuff. And I have to say, brilliant piece of editing that they got rid of it. It's actually quite a stupid little scene that they perfectly summarize off screen. The only thing you see is Marty saying, "Greetings, Earthling. I'm Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan." That's it. And then the next day, George runs up to Marty and says, "Oh, Marty, Darth Vader said if I don't take Lorraine to the dance, he's going to melt my brain." And it's this whole funny thing, but you're actually seeing Marty stand there saying, "If you don't take Lorraine to the dance, I will melt your brain." It's a bad scene.
It works better as it is in the movie. You don't need to see Marty explaining all this stuff. You just need to see George tell Marty what happened. And it's funny, like, while George and Marty are having this conversation, because Marty is like trying to open up a Coke bottle. You need a bottle opener, and that's on the side of the machine. And Marty has no idea how to do that. He's trying to twist it. And that is not said in dialogue. It just happens with their actions. And it's just like a cute little moment that's going on while this important exposition is happening. And it's great.
Oh, there's a lot of great George exposition, because the thing about George is he's your quote-unquote nerd. And then he becomes a cool guy through the events of this film. But the thing is, it turns out George, he always had it in him, because there's actually all these little elements that George is kind of cool. Like, he opens that Coke bottle, kind of cool. And he gets all this confidence from Marty to talk to Lorraine. He walks into that diner pretty cool. And he goes, "Lou, get me a milk. Chocolate." And he's kind of like the Fonz. Like, he's a confident guy. And even though he walks up to Lorraine and he kind of stumbles and stutters a little and accidentally says that he's her density instead of destiny, like, still, he's such a collected, cool, and kind of cute, as Lorraine calls him. She's totally falling for him, and it's working. Except just as, like, Lorraine's like, "Oh, hi, George." Just then, Biff comes in the diner and is like, "Hey, George McFly, I told you never to come in here again. How much money you got on you?" Remember what George replies?
How much do you want, right?
Yeah, oh my God.
It's super pathetic. And then the opposite of that is Marty, who stands up to Biff and punches him and then runs out into the square.
And has what might be possibly my favorite movie scene in history. This is possibly just a perfect scene.
It's great, and it's thrilling, and the score works, and it's really well done. You do notice that, like, they're basically just going around the square, like, in circles.
That's fine. It's just cool with a capital C. I mean, it was just so cool how he outwits them. These dumb brutes are gonna ram this guy into the manure, and he just runs through the convertible, and they scream, "Shit!" as they fall into shit, and it's just great. And you touched on it. The number one thing is the score. It's got this great hero score right when Marty like jumps over the convertible. It's fantastic and perfect. And the only thing it's not perfect for is George, because I don't know if you ever noticed this, but you could see when everyone's crowding around the manure car at the end, George in the background like totally sulks away.
I would even say he slinks away. Yes, I did notice that. Either word works. But yeah, he's heartbroken, and it's not working to get Lorraine to fall for George. So then they come up with this plan. And the plan is that Marty will take Lorraine to the dance, but then he will get a little too grabby in the car with her, and then George will come in and rescue her. This isn't great.
Now, I'm going to play a quick clip from comedian John Mulaney. He has a great bit on this. I'm going to just play it right here.
We thought, that it would be fun for people if the boy, he went back in time and he tried to fuck his mom. We thought that would be fun. And then, but don't worry, he doesn't get to fuck the mom because this family friend named Biff shows up and he tries to rape the mom, in front of the son. And then the dad, he has to beat the rapist off of her.
Yeah, he nails it. And I'll tell you that my girlfriend, who had never seen this film, when the mom was grabbing Marty's knee and she's like, ew, this is gross. And Biff has his hands all over Lorraine in the cafeteria. And she's like, this is just happening in the cafeteria. And I actually was like, yeah, it's the 50s. I don't think anyone would really stop that. Maybe if he punched her in the face, they would stop it. But no one's going to stop a guy just grabbing a woman in the cafeteria. And this plan, I definitely in 1985 saw it from Marty and George's point of view that, yeah, they're going to create this white knight situation. The classic trope of a fake mugging. Except it's not a fake mugging where someone's going to hold up a comb knife and be like, give me your money. And then someone fake beats him up. The plan for this to work is to make her so scared of this guy that she needs a knight to rescue her. I don't know if Marty really thought this through.
No, it's a really, really terrible, terrible plan. And it would be in any situation, in any context, but it is made actually worse by the fact that he's planning to do this to his mom. That only makes it worse. And again, it's pretty terrible even without that context. And then, of course, what ultimately happens is it's not Marty who does it, it's Biff who comes in. Biff interrupts Marty and Lorraine. Biff's goons drag Marty away and throw him in the car of the band, in the trunk of the car rather. So when George goes to confront who he thinks is Marty, it's actually Biff. And now it's not a fake attempted assault, it's an actual attempted assault. And keep in mind, in the original 1955 history, Lorraine is not assaulted. She goes to the dance with George and she has a lovely old time. This is happening because of Marty, that his mom is being assaulted now.
That's a very interesting take. I never thought of that. But the thing that I always loved about the scene is when George opens the door and he's, it's going to be this fixed fight. He's going to, hey, you get your damn hands off her. Why, George, nah, she's my woman. And then he's going to, one punch, he'll be down for the count and, he's the hero. But, once he sees it's Biff and Biff's like, get the fuck out of here, McFly. And then you see Lorraine pick her head up and, Leah Thompson, she has this look and she goes, George, help me, please. And it's actually a little bit terrifying. I hope it's not based on, method acting. This is not get your hands off me, Biff, in the cafeteria. This guy's going to rape her.
Yes, it is genuinely terrifying. I agree. I don't think it's about method acting because from what I was reading today, Thomas Wilson, who plays Biff, is apparently the nicest guy in the world. He only wanted to have a good time on set. And apparently Eric Stoltz was more of a method actor and he was actually hurting Thomas Wilson when he was playing Marty and was pushing him too hard. And Thomas Wilson was like, hey man, we're just acting, lighten up. So I don't think Leah Thompson was really scared, but she does a great job of convincing you, the viewer, that she is scared in that moment. And yeah, it would be terrifying for her.
Yeah, but he does something he should never be able to do, but it is believable that this one perfect punch is able to knock Biff out for 10 seconds. But it's perfect. And he's able to beat Biff up, save the day. Lorraine, she's now in love with the man who saved her. And everything seemingly is fixed.
Right. Except that they're supposed to kiss on the dance floor, which can't happen because the band can't play because Biff's goons threw Marty in the trunk. And while they were rescuing Marty, the guitar player cut his hand. But luckily, Marty can play guitar, so he steps in to play the romantic song Earth Angel. Except he's fading out from existence during the song because then this other bully shows up and pushes George out of the way. And I get why that happens from the perspective of the movie where you want to see Marty fading out from existence and then come roaring back in. And it's great with the music when he starts playing the guitar again and everything as he comes back when George kisses Lorraine. But I always kind of felt that bully, we don't really know who that guy is. And why does George at first start walking away like he's defeated again, 2 minutes after he just laid out Biff? It just kind of feels like one thing too many there.
I think the answer is it's exactly what you say. They need a reason that after Biff is laid out, they don't want to bring Biff back. He didn't quite beat him up, and then George has to punch him a second time. That would be less satisfying. I think this is just a plot point to get it across that he saves the day at the last second.
Yeah, I get that.
I said that the skateboarding scene might be my favorite scene, but this scene might be genuinely the most fun scene of the whole film, and that's the Johnny Be Good scene. And that's the band. They see that Marty can play competently, and they want to do one more song. They say, let's give him something that really cooks. And then Marty gives him a song, I guess it's from the future, even though he says it's an oldie where he comes from, and he plays Johnny Be Good, and the audience loves it.
They do. And someone else who loves it is the band leader, whose name is Marvin Barry, who calls his cousin Chuck and says, hey, that new sound you've been looking for? Listen to this. And I can believe that Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis just kind of wrote that as kind of a not a big deal gag. But I was reading that apparently Chuck Berry was very hesitant to allow this song to be used in the movie. And I think it was because of this context that, Chuck Berry is considered one of the founders of rock and roll. Rock and roll music has its traces in black culture and black music. And here's this movie saying, oh, but really it was a white guy named Marty McFly who invented rock and roll, which isn't a great look.
I think they're going for a joke, and I think it's one of those things you can look at it in that context. And had they known there was anything, they would have switched it to Jerry Lee Lewis, Great Balls of Fire. It would be something like that.
I get what you're saying. If that is, in fact, the reason why Chuck Berry was hesitant to take the check for this movie, I get it. That's all I'm saying. Of course, he ultimately did take the check. I think I read that he got $50,000 for them using his song, so I guess he ultimately decided it was worth it. But eventually Marty leaves the dance. He goes back to Doc in the town square. Doc has everything set up, kind of, because right as the lightning is going to strike, the wire is disconnected. And Doc has to scramble up the clock tower to fix everything and reconnect it. And this scene kind of made me think of the end of Toy Story. I realize that might be a weird comparison, but in the very end of Toy Story, there's all of these things that keep going wrong. And just when you think Woody and Buzz are gonna make it, then something else happens. And then another bad thing happens and they solve this problem and then another thing happens. And this final scene in Back to the Future really kind of has that manic energy where there's just one bad thing going wrong after another. The cord breaks and then Doc is falling from the clock and then he drops the wire and it's hanging from his pant leg. And meanwhile, Marty's there, but he can't get the car to start. And it's just all of these little things. Nothing's going right. And it's relentless, but in a really good way.
Yeah, and combine that with the fact that Something else that Marty's failed at is he's tried to warn Doc Brown about 1985 when he's going to be shot and presumably killed by terrorists. And he tries to write Doc a letter that he won't open until 1985, so hopefully the damage is minimal. But Doc refuses to take the letter. You do see that after he tears up the letter, he stuffs it all in his pocket. And Marty also figures when he realizes there's no letter, I'll go back early and I'll just warn him. And his plan is to go back 10 minutes early. That is not a very solid plan. You have limitless time. Why not just go back an hour or the day early or just, not 10 minutes?
Right. It's a dumb idea. To be fair, Marty has a lot of dumb ideas in this movie. And I guess you can maybe write it off as like, well, he's a 17-year-old kid. He makes some bad decisions. So,
that's it.
So whatever. But yeah, I mean, he is able to go back in time because Doc is able to fix everything and Marty's able to get the car started and he hits the gas and the lightning strikes the rod at the exact right moment, which, like you were saying earlier, it is weird that the lightning strikes at 10:04, but we don't know which second. And it really seems like that detail is extremely important when, traveling at 88 miles an hour and it has to happen at the exact right moment.
And it turns out I think Doc's calculations were wrong.
Yes.
Because if Marty had accelerated when the alarm went off, he would have overshot it.
Yes, unless Doc's plan was that the alarm was going to go off early and then Marty was going to need an extra 5 seconds to start the car, which would be a pretty weird plan. I think you're absolutely right. The calculations were wrong.
Yeah. As a kid, I always imagined that, this wouldn't have been as exciting, but to just build some kind of little circular track with a huge lightning rod and have just a wire connected to the flux capacitor. You're just driving around at 88 miles per hour continuously until lightning strikes that thing.
I love the idea of little 5-year-old James, working this out in his head, sitting in his room, drawing pictures of, a track. I love that.
I also had the idea that even if he was driving all the way, up the road, I thought it would be something more of, a retracting, a fire hose that the wire's been connected for a quarter mile, and as he's driving closer and closer, it's just winding in. And
sure.
So he can also overshoot it as well. Yeah, I had a lot of alternate theories of how I would have done this better, but he does ultimately successfully send him. And it's very satisfying, not only because it was a very tense scene, he makes it the last second, but it's also satisfying because Doc is happy that he sends Marty to the future, but you could tell he's also happy that, he's not a fuck up. Earlier in the scene, when he sees the flux capacitor, working, he's like, I finally invent something that works. Could you imagine, you're an inventor that everything you invent, sucks, and then, someone tells you, one day you're going to invent the time machine, it's a pretty cool thing.
Yes, it's a very triumphant moment for Doc, and you feel that triumph for him as well as Marty. But once Marty gets back to 1985, he is ready to go and save Doc with that extra 10 minutes he gave himself, but the car won't start. And that's happened a few times in the movie, so it's believable that the starter's busted or whatever. DeLoreans were not well made, as you said. So Marty has to run over to Lone Pine Mall, no longer Twin Pines Mall. Very interesting because Marty ran over one of those pine trees in 1955, and apparently that crazy farmer never thought to, replant a pine tree.
Well, they were twins. You can't just replant a twin.
Sure you can. It's a tree. Can you just take a clipping from one and then plant another?
Baby Groot is a different person than Groot.
I think he could have still called it a twin pine and no one would have really cared.
But I love those small details in this film,
Yes. And as Marty runs to the Lone Pine Mall, he sees Doc get shot. He's too late. He's crying over what he thinks is the dead Doc. But then Doc opens his eyes because he was wearing a bulletproof vest. He did read the letter after all. He taped it back together.
Yeah.
Marty is back in his original timeline. He goes home, he goes to sleep, he thinks maybe it was all a dream. He wakes up and the world that he knows is different. It's the same house, but it's different. There's way nicer furniture, and his brother is wearing a suit and not the Burger King uniform, and his parents show up and they are thinner and seem happier and more in love with each other. And Biff is outside detailing the car because he is not George's boss now. Everything around them has changed, all for the better. And we'll talk next week when we talk about Back to the Future Part 2 about how Crispin Glover wasn't in this movie. Apparently, that was for several reasons, but one of the issues he had with Zemeckis and Gale was he didn't like the end of this movie because he felt like the nicer house and like all of the material things that the McFlys have at the end of the movie that they didn't have in the beginning of the movie sent the wrong message. He felt it was very like materialistic. You know, like Marty gets that 4x4 that he looked at in the beginning of the movie and he thought was so cool. You just kind of assume that the McFlys are wealthier now, so, you know, his parents could afford to buy him that truck. And Crispin Glover felt like that was the wrong message to send. And you could debate the merits of that, but I sort of see where he's coming from. You know, he felt like the reward should just be that his parents are happier.
Yeah, I could totally see them making subtle changes. Like, instead of his brother being like in Burger King in the beginning, he could have been like a depressed artist or something. And now he's like a happy artist. You don't necessarily show that he's rich, but he's very happy doing what he's doing. And I agree with you. It's a very interesting take. But I will say that George and Lorraine, they're just, like you said, more in love, and they are fitter. And, you know, not that, you know, being thin means, you know, necessarily like happier, but they were both depressed in the beginning. And she was an alcoholic, and George is like eating peanut brittle like out of the box in a bowl of cereal, like pretty gross. Like, and these people are just like, they're happier with their lives now, and it all stemmed from the self-confidence. But that's a very interesting take, that they could have conveyed that they weren't winners because they had a truck.
Right.
And to be fair, I've always thought that if everything got better, why would they be living in the same crappy house?
That is very true. I also think that you could make the argument that why are the kids still there? Because when you think about it, if George and Lorraine's relationship has changed, what are the odds that they would have had sex at the exact same time and created the exact same 3 kids?
Yeah, that's a common thing in these time travel films, that you don't have to do anything complicated to change the future. Just go back to the bad guy's parents' house, like the night he's going to be conceived. Just fire a few guns in the air. That's all. Just scare them for like a second. So they just like, you know, oh, they have sex like 20 minutes later and a different sperm, you know, like fertilize the egg. Totally different. No Hitler now.
Exactly. I was reading something where they said that this movie doesn't actually subscribe to the butterfly effect theory where like the tiniest change will have catastrophic consequences. The changes in this movie and kind of the whole series are like localized to like one specific thing. So if you just kind of like buy that as a generality, you can just be like, okay, and not really think about those details, which honestly, fine. I can give it a pass on that.
I agree. I mean, any time travel film, you're going to have a problem with one of these things.
But, you know, Marty's happy. He's got his truck. Jennifer shows up. They're going to go for their weekend away. But then Doc shows up and says, there's something that's got to be done about your kids. And they fly off into the DeLorean. And the movie ends on like this quasi cliffhanger, which Zemeckis and Gale have said they kind of just put that last scene in there like as a joke. They weren't planning to do a sequel. That really wasn't anything that they thought about. It was just kind of meant as like a gag, which is funny, I guess. But having seen this movie as a kid, I definitely wanted to see more adventures of Doc and Marty from that little moment there.
Oh, 100%. And I also believe they didn't think there was going to be a sequel, because the setup of Marty and Jennifer, you both have to come with me, something's got to be done about your kids. It's a weaker plot device for the second film to drive it. And, you know, it's very interesting. When I was watching this on Netflix, you know, roads, where we're going, we don't need roads. And they fly off into the credits. For years, I always saw a sign that said "to be continued." And apparently, that was not in the original theatrical release. It was in the VHS release. And like all the years of like HBO, and it was on TBS or TNT, whichever one of those it was on every week. Like it always had "to be continued." So it seems that they always had this idea. But you're right, it was not planned that way. And that's how the movie ends. It's supposed to be a one-off, and here they go again. And, you just imply what's going to happen in your own headcanon, which I have lots of Avengers in my headcanon.
Headcanon. I feel like I don't need to ask you if it stands the test of time. I think this is a pretty clear answer for both of us.
It definitely stands the test of time, 100%. And at several points in my life, I would say, any year, if you ask my top 5 films during, 15, 20 years of my life, this was the number one film, my favorite film. It's just such a wonderful film. It makes me so happy watching it. The music is so great. The things that like don't hold up is really just the 80s centric jokes and the 80s fashion. Marty McFly's vest always looked ridiculous to me. Even in the 80s, it does look ridiculous. But the acting is fantastic. Everyone is great in it. Robert Zemeckis certainly, he's proven his ability to direct films, although you don't like Forrest Gump. But I could go on about this film, but it's just so great. The perfect bully, the perfect redemption, the perfect action. And it's kind of an everyman adventure because Han Solo, I don't relate to Han Solo or even Ferris Bueller. But Marty McFly at least kind of looked like an everyday kid. I always loved this film. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about part 2 next week. And so for me, Back to the Future does stand the test of time. What do you think, Al?
Yeah, of course. This movie definitely stands the test of time. There's no question about it. I mean, the screenplay is so great. I mean, there's just so many little things. The direction, the actors' expressions are great. After George beats up Biff and then Marty is telling Doc what happened, he says something like, "My dad never stood up to Biff in his entire life." And Doc just kind of like raises an eyebrow and thinks about it for a second and then shakes it off and is like, "Okay, no matter, we got to send you into the future." Like he realizes that they have changed the future. They have affected the space-time continuum. Doc sees that. And you, the audience, can see that Doc sees that if you're paying attention. You get more when you watch this movie again and again. It's just brilliant. It's layered. It's unbelievably rewatchable. It's inherently quotable. It's memorable. The fact that we designed our show logo to look like that. I've had people come up to me while wearing the Test of Time t-shirt or mask or whatever. Yeah, I wear our own merch. Maybe that's lame and I'm that guy, quote unquote. But people have like not read that it said the Test of Time and just kind of seen the logo and been like, "Oh, I love Back to the Future too." That ride at Universal Studios was there forever. I remember as a kid going on the Universal Studios tour in LA, and you would see the clock tower and they would tell you that clock tower, they redesigned it for 1955, 1985, 2015, and the bad 1985. I don't know if that's still there or if they even still do the tour anymore, but like this story has endured. Rick and Morty is a very different thing, but like clearly has taken inspiration from Doc and Marty here. Yeah, of course, this movie stands the test of time. It's a no-brainer.
All right, 2 for 2. And that would have been the end of our podcast if either one of us voted the other way.
Absolutely. But for next week's episode, James, do you think we have enough road?
I don't know. Do we need roads where we're going?
No. Where we're going, we don't need roads. Next week, of course, we have to do Back to the Future Part 2. We'll be talking about it then. In the meantime, you can talk to us at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. You can email us at thetestoftimepodcast@gmail.com. We want to know your thoughts on Back to the Future. We want to know your thoughts on our new podcast cover art. What do you think? Kind of cool, right? And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Now make like a tree and get out of here.